My animation students are learning to do armatures and rigging for objects. So for this next project, we were needing to use a pendulum for showing overlap and follow through motion. There are no good rigs out there, or maybe they just need to learn how to rig themselves. So today we're going to create a rigged pendulum using armatures for use inside of Blender. So let's jump into this. But before we get started, make sure you hit like or subscribe to pay the class fee. All right, first of all, let's build our pendulum structure. So we've got our cube here. Let's adjust that, flatten that out a little bit. There we go. That'll be our main platform. Let's move it up to around a 5. There we go. And now let's add a cylinder for our connecting object between the platform and the ball. I'm going to again move that up. Let's make that a little smaller. I like about a 0.2 on that. There we go. Make it a little longer, probably take it up to about 2. Could be a little longer than that, but 2 looks good. We need to subdivide this, so let's go jump over here to edit mode, and we're going to do a loop cut on the object, and let's increase the loop cut. Somewhere between 10 and 12 seems to work really well. I'm going to go with a 10. That looks good. And then jump back here to object mode. And let's add a sphere to the base of our pendulum. So add mesh, UV sphere. There we go. Let's move that up just a smidge. Good. And I'm going to make that just a little smaller, so it's not quite, just for personal aesthetics. There we go. And how's that? Yes. Okay. So we have the ball connected to, or in the cylinder will be placed inside the ball here. Let's go ahead and join these 3 objects. So holding the shift key, I select all 3. Let's go to object and then join so that they are now all one object off of the cube. So let's add our armature. So add armature. That will add a single bone to it. If you cannot see it, it's currently located here inside the sphere. You can turn on in front. That used to be called X-ray. Now it is called in front. Let's move it up here, and I'm going to want the base of this inside my cube. So the bottom circle, that is going to be the root of the object. And right there should do it. Let's rotate this on the y-axis so that the base of the root is connected to my cube at the top. So let's do a rotation of 180. There we go. And scale it down a little bit because I did break this into 10 segments. Now we're ready to extrude this just like we would extrude a normal any object inside of Blender. So jump over here to edit mode, select my base here, hit E, and I'm extruding on the Z parameter. So I'm going to hit Z. Otherwise I get very strange, or it doesn't follow the object very well. And do the same thing again, EZ, EZ, because that's what it is. And I didn't really keep track of how many I had going on here, but that works really well. And let's do one more into the sphere. Now these are all parented off of this root object, so they are all interconnected. They are a series of bones. This is our root bone, and this is the end bone for what we're creating here. So we've now got our series of bones. Let's jump back here to object mode. When we're working with bones and we're planning on animating it, object and edit mode work pretty much the way you would expect them to inside of Blender when working with this. But to move things or to pose them inside of your Blender software, you need to use the pose mode, and this is what you're most commonly going to use when you're doing animation. So if I click one of the objects here and I hit the G key, and let's rotate this on the y-axis, you can see this changes the object on just that axis. I'm going to hit the escape key, GX, and you can see it's now moving this on the x-axis, so I can rotate the ball on and the whole object on that once I have them parented to that object. Currently they're not parented, so first we're going to select the mesh or our cube, and we need to parent that to our, or parent or make the armature the parent of this entire object. So with the mesh selected, we're then going to hold the shift key and select, oops, need to go back to object mode. With the cube and our pendulum selected, hold the shift key, select our armature, and now we can go ahead and parent by going to object, parent, and we're going to parent with automatic weights. And that makes it easiest to use for this particular project. The nice thing about parenting with weights, when I have that added, I can then go to weight paint, and you can see what is influenced most by the different armatures. Currently I have the end armature selected, and you can see it most influences what the end part of my pendulum, the ball, is going to be influencing. Based upon where you select in there or which armature is selected, you're able to then change what that is influencing. So the weight painting does show you quickly what is being influenced by different parts. Okay, let's jump back here to pose mode, and we're almost ready to start animating. If I select one of these armatures, you can see what its impact is on the object. So I'm going to hit the G key, and let's do an X, and you can see that we're moving it this direction. And of course we can do rotate as well, and you can see some of the deformation that is happening on the object as I do the movements. So again, R, and let's rotate on the x-axis. Oh, I'm rotating everything. And you can see the deformation that is happening inside the object. That's our weight painting in action. Okay, so we've got a basic pendulum now set up. Let's get busy and animate it. Now, before we get too far into our animation, do remember that we're rendering the view of our camera. So whatever the camera sees is what is going to be rendered to our film. So currently this is all that's showing in my camera. So I probably need to adjust that a little bit before we're going to be able to do something. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit. Let's adjust the rotation a little bit, the angle of it, and jump back, and we'll just keep playing with it until we're happy with how our camera looks. And I'm just going to pause this while I get my camera set up. Okay, I've now got my camera located where I can easily see the full pendulum and be able to have room for my animation. I'll switch back to my camera view. So the pendulum is currently located in the center. I'm just going to do basic movements on this, but let's go ahead and finish getting everything set up. So obviously I'm going to be doing a lot with my dope sheet. So let's change this over to the dope sheet, and I'm going to want my timeline as well. So we'll pull this out. I don't need very much room on my timeline. We'll just shift this back to timeline, and now we're ready to get started. One thing we need to think about is how many frames are going to be this. I'm going to keep this fairly short, so let's go 72 frames or 3 seconds, and we'll zoom in on those seconds. There we go. Keep the sheets relatively close to each other there. And then what's our output going to be? Usually for traditional US film, we're looking at 24 frames per second, or YouTube, or whatever we're happening to work with. So we got our 24 frames per second. What's going to be our output? Generally for animation, we're going to want MPEG, unless you're going to do further editing in another piece of software like DaVinci Resolve or something like that. In that case, you're probably going to want to go with TIFF. But I'm going to go with MPEG for this. We can do our encoding, make sure that that's set to H.264, which is the standard MPEG output. Medium quality, everything's set to good, and I am using Eevee as my rendering. So yeah, rendering engine is Eevee. We're just doing a quick and dirty example of this, so that'll be great. So I got 72 frames to work with. Let's turn on auto key. That makes life so much easier, and begin to play with our object. So we'll move it here. So when we're working with this for animation, for big movements, we're going to be in object mode, and we'll want to move the entire framework on this. So I'll grab the whole project or the whole object, hit the G key, and I'm going to move it along the Y axis. And I did not select the whole object. There we go. Hit the whole object, hit G, and then the Y key to constrain it to the Y axis. And I'm just going to have it move that very first part there. And this will show us our summary for our dope sheet. Will show us all the different movements. We actually haven't moved it yet, but this will show us our object so that we can get a breakdown of what's happening inside the object a little bit more easily. So let's say I've got my initial keyframe set now, and I want to move it, let's say over the space of 12 seconds or 12 frames, which would be about half a second. So we'll again move the object, grab it, and move it. Oops, I wanted to constrain it to the y-axis. And let's move it over there. And then move another 24 frames in. And we're going to move really quick this time, so grab it, y-axis, and all the way back over to the other side. And then a slower movement. We'll jump out here to 48 frames. Again, move it back. Take a whole second to move over there. And then, let's do a real quick series of jumps. So back here, and then jump over here to the middle, and then maybe jump back to where it came from. And I'm only moving on one axis. This isn't really high-tech thing that I'm doing here. And then our final frame, 72, GY, move back to the center. Okay, so we've got our basic object now set in the environment. Let's jump over here to pose mode. Go back here to frame 1, and what do we want this to do? As it is moving and beginning to move away around frame 2, the ball is should stay in. The whole purpose of doing an object like this is to show the follow-through and overlapping animation for this. So as it begins to move, we're going to need to work with our armatures here, and let's say about right there, and I'm going to again rotate on the y-axis and just a little, or not the y-axis, or maybe it is the y. Nope, I want the x-axis. and I want it to move just a smidge. The ball's still going to stay in the same place. We can jump over here a few more frames and maybe add a little bit more to this. So rotate on the x-axis again, and maybe jump down another frame there, and rotate on the x-axis. There we go. And then as it hits here, these are going to continue to follow through. So let's adjust the rotations again. Oh, it's still going to be behind, so I guess we don't need to rotate those yet. It's going to be about here. And let's, yeah, right there. And then these are going to rotate again. So now if we scrub this, you're going to start seeing that our motion, we're getting our follow through, and we can go through and set the whole thing this way. And maybe here it's really starting to drag. So let's jump down a little bit, rotate this a little more, maybe even a little more here. There we go. And there. And just keep playing with it until you're happy. Rotate it some more. And let's rotate this one. Maybe go out a couple more frames. Let's rotate another one. And this is going to adjust as we do different speeds. So now I'm going to pause it. Go ahead and work on what you think your animation should look like, and then we'll see what we have at the end. Okay, so we've got a final rotation now set up and ready to go on our project. We've got the animation pretty much ready to go. There could be a little bit more tweaking to do it. You can see we're using heavy use of tweening here to make sure that our objects have good rotation and movement inside of that. It's having the impact that I want. So let's stop this, and we might want to jump back here to object mode and go off of our camera. And it might be nice to dress up your object a little bit. You could add more color to it, or add that. Probably should have done that before I joined them all together. It would have been a little easier to work with. But if you want to make it more attractive, it's real easy to go over here to shading and add a texture. Oh, what kind of texture should we have? Let's just go with a basic checker, and we'll make that a little more interesting. Draw the color over, and now our object's a little bit more fun to look at. Jump back here to our animation mode. And change to our camera, turn on our shader, and now we can see it happening with the checker. And once we're happy with how our animation is looking, we can make sure that our outputs are set correctly, 24 frames per second. What's the resolution you want to output at? 1080p looks fine. Output to MPEG, FFmpeg video, and the H.264 codecs, and then hit render animation, and we're set to go. It will render the whole thing, and I've got it set to output to my desktop instead of the temp folder on the C drive. I hope you found this useful. Make sure you subscribe if you'd like to see more animation tutorials or how to rig tutorials using Blender.